Hello, welcome back to another episode of Math with Policy. You're watching Precalculus, Season 2, Episode 34. We're going to continue our investigation in trigonometry by deriving the double angle identities for cosine. That's why identities is plural here. Alright, so, oops, that's awkward. Let's zoom back in. Alright, so the situation is this. We have cosine of 2 alpha. Now, if you watched the last video, you can probably guess our first step here. So, we know that cosine 2 alpha is equal to cosine of alpha plus alpha, and then we can do what we did last time, just apply the addition identity for cosine. So, setting that up, we get cosine alpha minus sine alpha, which is equal to cosine squared alpha minus sine squared alpha. Cool. So that is our first identity. Cosine of 2 alpha is equal to cosine squared alpha minus sine squared alpha. Alright. And that box was terrible. Let's fix it. So this proof here used the fact that cosine of alpha plus beta is equal to cosine alpha cosine beta minus cosine or minus sine sine alpha sine beta. Alright. Now we're gonna think about this fact that we have cosine squared minus sine squared, because that actually looks like something we've seen before. In fact, we have this identity that cosine squared alpha plus sine squared alpha is equal to 1. That is one of the Pythagorean trig identities, one of 3, which we proved long ago now. So, in other words, if we think about this green identity, if we were to subtract cosine squared from both sides, that means that sine squared alpha is equal to 1 minus cosine squared alpha. So, if we use this fact, we can now rearrange this cosine squared alpha minus sine squared alpha. And if we substitute a 1 minus cosine squared for that sine squared, then we get cosine squared alpha minus the quantity 1 minus cosine squared alpha. So what we're doing now is we're just taking this result and plugging it in over here. So now what we have to do is distribute that negative. So once we distribute that negative, we get cosine squared alpha minus 1 plus cosine squared alpha. And this is equal to 2 cosine squared alpha minus 1. And that is our second identity. So cosine of 2 alpha is also equal to this, and we'll make a nice blue box again. Alright, it's a terrible blue box, but we'll run with it. And we could actually do the same sort of work over here with our Pythagorean identity. So we could have subtracted a sine squared from both sides. So we got cosine squared alpha is equal to 1 minus sine squared alpha. And we could use that. We could use that either here where we substituted that sine squared for the 1 cosine squared, but instead now just substituting the cosine squared out. Or we could actually just use this identity down here, right? It doesn't really matter. We'll just use the one on the bottom. So this 2 minus cosine squared alpha minus 1 is the same thing as 2 times the quantity of 1 minus sine squared alpha and quantity minus 1. We're just plugging in this 1 minus sine squared in for cosine squared. So if we do this, now we have to distribute our 2. So we get 2 minus 2 sine squared alpha minus 1. So note we have a 2 minus 1. That's going to leave us with a minus 1. So we get 1 minus 2 sine squared alpha, and that is our third result. Alright, so let's summarize. So we have cosine of 2 alpha is equal to cosine squared alpha minus sine squared alpha, which is equal to 1 minus 2 sine squared alpha, which is equal to 2 cosine squared alpha minus 1. That is our summary. We'll note here's a summary. Alright, cool. Final results. Alright, and that concludes our episode. If you've enjoyed our content, please subscribe. Consider supporting us financially on Patreon. Thank you for joining our math party, and we will see you next time.